Welcome to Makers of Tomorrow, the podcast where each episode we talk with founders, industry leaders, and innovators to explore the latest trends shaping brands and the consumer experience.
We are your hosts, Karine Mallet and Corey Gottlieb, founders of Replica, the social selling platform revolutionizing how brands connect, inspire, and sell in today's digital world. So whether you're a brand leader, entrepreneur, or just fascinated by the evolution of digital commerce, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. The way we discover, shop, and connect with brands has completely changed. The most successful brands today aren't just selling products, they're telling stories, building connections, and creating communities. Today's guest is Emily Yeston, co-founder of Doré. She teamed up with Garance Doré, one of the first digital influencers. She has seen firsthand how digital engagement is transforming the industry, from the rise of social commerce to the growth of direct-to-consumer brands. With Doré, she's creating a brand that's all about simplicity, transparency, and sustainability. Today, we're taking a look at how Doré is raising the bar in beauty. Let's get into it. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, this is awesome.
So, Emily, can you tell us what was the inspiration behind Doré?
Absolutely. Our background and sort of how Doré started was out of a blog that my business partner, Garance Doré, began back in 2006. She was one of the first fashion and beauty bloggers back in the sort of early days of digital media. And we, for many years, had a digital lifestyle platform that talked about fashion, beauty, interiors, travel, sort of that joie de vivre, if you will. And she's French, so that's sort of the French half of the brand and the business. And sort of throughout that time of the blog, I think, we became really known worldwide for a French approach to all aspects of life, including beauty. And that for us was one of simplicity and efficacy, not overly complicated routines or, super complex formulas, anything like that. In that time, we featured a lot of French women on the site and talked a lot about French pharmacy products. Fast forward many years, kind of later. And during the pandemic, we were sort of trying to think about what the next chapter of this, media platform would be, given that so much had moved onto social, which, hadn't really been around when the blog started back in 2006. So it really, we sort of lived through this really interesting media evolution. And during that time, during the pandemic, I was buying a classic French pharmacy skincare product on Amazon. And I had this kind of aha moment that, French pharmacy beauty hadn't really modernized. And a lot of the sort of brands and players that were there were these legacy players, these legacy formulas that had been around for decades. They were very tried, trusted, and true. But, given our experience in media and talking about brands, we had really seen the movement of clean beauty take hold, especially here in the US. But we hadn't really sort of seen the same approach being taken within the pharmacy channel in France. And so I called Garance and I said, I have a crazy idea. I think we should start a modern French pharmacy skincare brand. And she was like, what do you mean? We don't know anything about making products or how to start a brand or anything like that. But, we had worked with brands from Estee Lauder and L'Oreal, Shiseido, for many, many years, kind of on the brand marketing side of things. So anyways, I thought, it's just a bad idea. I'll, move on to the next one. We'll leave it there. And a couple days later, she called me back and she was like, I have the entire vision for the brand. I absolutely think we should do this. And so in the middle of the pandemic, we decided to start working on creating the brand Doré that you sort of know and see today.
But talk about the benefits of working with an influencer, right? You give her 24 hours, all of a sudden she had the entire marketing plan worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I think Garance is such a visionary. She always has been. She's a visionary. She was, very early sort of in the blogging space and in that world. She's always been, I think, almost ahead of her time in a way, and being able to see how media and the world and everything is evolving very quickly. She's been great. When you give her sort of a carrot of something like that, she can really sort of bring the whole thing to life very quickly and sort of have that idea and that foresight to be able to build off of. And I think that's been what's so great about our partnership, is that she's usually got such a great vision, and then I sort of work to really execute against that. And so I think that's what's really nice about working in partnership in a new venture like this.
Sure. So your product differentiators then are really simplicity, right? And
Yeah. In a way, yeah, I think it depends a little bit about like the channel where you're finding us. I would say like within the US market, it's the beauty industry is so crowded and there's so much here, but you're seeing a lot of brands and lines that are very focused on multi-step routines and needing a different product for every little thing. And there's always a way of upselling and creating sort of more complexity in that routine. And what we loved about sort of the pharmacy space and this more a French approach to skincare is the idea of less is more a little bit when it comes to how you think about your routine and the products that you're using. I think generally our philosophy is like the skin actually really knows what it needs to do. Sometimes it just needs a little bit of extra help to be able to do its best. And I think consistency is incredibly important when it comes to taking care of your skin. We really like the idea of kind of paring things back a little bit and using fewer products, but super effective ones so that you're still getting a really high level of efficacy and really taking care of the skin, but with just fewer steps in the routine so that it's something that you can maintain, regularly and stay consistent with. And I think, within the French world where that does exist to some extent, what we're bringing to the table is, formulas that are using completely non-toxic ingredients. So you're able to get that level of efficacy and the benefits of that simplicity.
So this is really interesting to me because in a world that's pretty complicated, and especially the world of communication and social media, kind of the focus of the podcast is, all right, we've got this great brand. How do we tell our story? Who do we tell our story to? And ultimately, how do we drive traffic to our e-commerce site and hopefully make sales from it? What challenges have you faced in a world that's kind of overcomplicated when your message is simplicity?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring it out. And I would be totally lying to you if I said I had like all of the answers right now. I mean, we're still just a couple of years into this. I think that's like a big existential question that we have all the time. Like, how do you, put a brand forward that's really focused on simplicity and who has a consumer that's not necessarily maybe like the most ingredient savvy or looking for like the newest and greatest innovation, but is really looking for something safe and trustworthy and sort of straightforward that they can use and feel good about. And the way that you communicate with them is so different than how maybe another type of beauty brand would. Like, I don't think our customer, for example, is following beauty influencers on social media. They're not that like plugged into that space. And so for us, it's been trying to find other sort of like adjacent categories and lifestyle interests that are speaking to that customer. And we have a mix of men and women too with the brand. It's not, all one or the other. That really sort of has a busy life and has a lot going on and is just looking for something fairly utilitarian and efficacious that they can feel good about in their routine. And so it's a little bit non-traditional for a beauty brand in that way.
And I think it may even turn into an advantage, right? Because your messaging has to be fairly simple. You've got a very simple value proposition, and that's part of the core value proposition of the brand. So even though the world is communicated in terms of options for, telling your story, it seems like at least maybe this could be a superpower of the brand. No matter where we're telling the story is a simple one for especially those busy people who hear all this crowded space and all these influencers and all this noise around beauty. If you stay in your lane with a very simple message, I guess the distribution of that message becomes secondary.
In some ways. And I think, this is so antithetical to what you see in the market right now, but we really focused on a product first mentality versus a marketing first mentality when we built this brand. For us, it was all about creating wonderful products that were sort of the highest quality that you'd be able to get at this more accessible price point. Because we always felt, and this is, I think, very true of how beauty kind of grows within the French market, at least from my very American observation of that, is if you make a great product that people love to use and they love to come back to, they're more likely to recommend it to someone else. And I think especially in beauty, the power of recommendation and the power of that referral is so meaningful and can be much more meaningful than an ad that you see, on social media. And so it's a little bit more, I would say, like a slower grassroots approach in that way, but I think it's one that gives a little bit more longevity to the way that we think about the brand, in the long term.
So what is the distribution channels for your brand? Like, where is this sold? Is it obviously you have an e-commerce site?
We do have an e-commerce site. That's kind of where we started, essentially like flipped the blog into being the e-com site for the brand back when we launched in May of 2022. We just launched with Ulta Beauty last year, which was super exciting for us. And they've been a fantastic partner. I think for us, it's really about being where the consumer is right now and where they're purchasing. Ulta Beauty is one of the biggest beauty retailers in the United States. And has a huge map of stores around the country. And so for us, it was making sure that there was that accessibility to where you could find the brand. So we're in 600 of their stores and then online as well. And they have a huge community around what they've built. So we're really proud to be there and they've been fantastic. And then we're also on Amazon, which again, the idea of essentialism, I think it's important to sort of be where people are buying those essentials. And Amazon is now a big part of that. And then we also have a retail presence in Europe, specifically in France, at a handful of French pharmacies, and then with some of the French retailers like Galeries Lafayette, and we're launching at another department store there soon. So it's been wonderful to expand the brand in an international way.
And is that the way you're looking to expand through more brick and mortar? Do you look at the social channels as well?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely look at the social channels. I think, especially in beauty, it's really hard to build a profitable direct-to-consumer business in 2025. It's a challenging channel from a customer acquisition standpoint. And so, definitely social selling through working with influencers and things like that has become very important to us. But tapping into, these retail partners that have a very large customer base, I think is a great opportunity for us and something that we're looking forward to doing a bit more. But yeah, I remember hearing the founder of another skincare brand that was just acquired a couple of years ago. They're wildly successful. And she was talking about their distribution split, and less than 10% of their business was direct to consumer. And the rest of the business was split primarily between Target and Amazon. And I feel like that's so antithetical to what you hear in this DTC, VC funded space in the consumer world. But I think there's something to that. And I think it's important to figure out from a prioritization standpoint and also from profitability standpoint where it makes sense to invest your dollars to make sure that you can grow the business most successfully.
Talking about platform, what does the role of social commerce plays in your strategies?
So we've approached it sort of in two different ways. So the first is, partnering with influencers and creators and giving them the opportunity to share the brand and be able to sell and earn against the brand. And so that's a big part of it. We do that in a very organic manner still because we are still a young brand. And then I think the other piece of it is empowering your customers to help sort of sell and advocate for your products as well. And so we have an ambassador program that we've built that allows our loyal customers to sort of become a part of that and be able to share the brand to their communities too. And I would say together, those two things work really nicely in tandem with one another to help, again, with that word of mouth sort of approach to how we look at getting the brand out there.
Can you dig into that a little bit on an affiliate program? How do you identify the loyal customers to be a part of the program? And then what is the mechanism that you give them so that they could, post on social and expand the reach of your brand through their network?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we do a lot of that registration and sign up through email, just getting emails out there to them and showing them that this is an opportunity if it's something that they want to engage in. We do also take the time to reach out to our most loyal customers and say, hey, we have this opportunity. If it's something that you're interested in, let us know. We'd love to collaborate with you. I think it's about building really strong CRM and email flows to be able to people into these programs. And then we've done a few different ways of incentivizing. There's been, access to free product, early access to product, referral, fees that they're getting.
Giving them incentives to be part of the brand and kind of part of the family is a tried and true method of, creating loyalty and building off of that loyalty.
Absolutely. And I think, there's all of these great incentives from a monetization standpoint and things like that, but also I think there's an incentive in terms of being part of the actual process of developing and building the brand that's quite special and meaningful and totally changes your relationship with a brand when you feel like I actually got to try that product and help them decide whether or not to make it. I think that makes a real difference.
Do you then give them links that they could then post in social, and it'd be then whatever compensation model you may have? It could be cash, it could be rewards, it could be discounts. Do you use all of those methods?
Yeah, we do. So I think, it's great. There's a lot of different softwares out there now that sort of have streamlined that entire process for us. And they've made it a lot easier to sort of put those incentive programs in place and create different milestones and tiers and things like that within that. So yeah, so we use, a software to help us with executing against all of that. And it's been really helpful. We have a really small, very lean team. And so to be able to have that sort of level of sophistication in terms of what our loyalty and rewards and ambassador program looks like has been really fantastic to be able to let us execute against something like that.
Yeah, I think this is a need that Karine and I identified several years ago when we created Replica Software is, driving that ambassador program, loyalty program, really reaching your core audience through your network of product experts and loyal
Yeah,
customers, because
absolutely.
everybody has a network, right? So it sounds like you're really tapping into that. That's awesome. There's
Yeah.
one thing you have to kind of zero base for me. So obviously growing the community is really important, but you also mentioned that a growing percentage of your product sales are going through Amazon and brick and mortar stores where you don't get to know who the customer is.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're moving product, which is great. You're selling more and you're reaching more people, but you as a brand don't get to know who they are. So how do you juxtapose that position where you have a very important sales channel, but you can't necessarily remarket to those customers because you don't know who they are?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time, and when we launched at Ulta, I visited almost 100 stores in 6 weeks. I think there's nothing more valuable than actually getting into a store and talking to people in real life. And so while, yes, we don't necessarily have data at our fingertips from a remarketing standpoint, I think there's something so valuable about actually spending time connecting in person and sort of starting to learn who that customer is through that, one-on-one interaction that you can have with them in that space. That's why we've started like building out a field team to support us in those kinds of channels with Ulta specifically, so that we can get that insight and that feedback and start to understand who the customer is. I think that sometimes we live obviously in such a like a data forward moment right now, and there's so much information available to us, but I think that human connection is still so core and so central to how you think about building the brand. And so I really love to be able to take a step sort of back from that and really focus on those moments and those opportunities to connect in person as much as we can, so that we get a better sense of the customer in that way.
So this is interesting. You're getting the customer profile in aggregate. You're
Yeah.
understanding who your customer is, and you're honing in on that because you're actually in the stores speaking to the people who are maybe purchasing or repurchasing your products.
Yep.
And so you kind of have this idea who your ideal customer is. Who would that be? Like, how would you describe your ideal customer?
I would say it's primarily women. I would say like in their late 30s, 40s, early 50s. Again, a lot of them are like they're moms, being women. They have a lot going on, and they're really willing to learn and are curious about what's happening in the space, and they want to learn, which I think is great. And that's been a really big part of it. I think in my observation and experience and going to these stores and doing events, I definitely see the difference in, the Gen Z kind of Gen Alpha teens that are coming in and they're saying, I saw this on TikTok, where can I find it? They're not necessarily as interested in having the conversation. They're doing a lot of that education online on social media. Whereas, a customer that's more of that older millennial Gen X customer that I think we're connecting with, they maybe have some background, some knowledge, but they're still really willing to have that conversation and talk to you and sort of learn a little bit about the space. And that's been great. I met a lot of teachers. I met a lot of moms that were shopping with their kids. I met a lot of women that were nurses that were coming in on a lunch break to try things. And so you really see a real diversity of background and experience and
And
lifestyle.
that busy, I mean, you just described a customer that's busy, right? I mean, the nurses, the teachers, and they're coming in, they're going in quickly. So I would imagine, once again, your message of simplicity, it's not a very complicated routine. You can do it in a short period of time. And it dates back to principles that we've learned in French skincare for centuries now. I would imagine that is, again, one of the superpowers is you can communicate that fairly quickly. I think it's a lesson for everybody to understand. Like, you may have a lot of important ingredients and a lot of sophistication in what you present, but at the end of the day, it's the most simplified version of that you want to present to your audience so they get it quickly and they understand it and they'll be willing to try it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, I have to do a lot of like putting my blinders on, because if you look at what everyone else is doing, you're like, oh, should I be thinking about this or doing that? And no, I think like really staying true to that core message and staying really focused on that is important. And storytelling should be simple. I think for people to understand it at scale, like simplicity, even if the brand is complex, I think figuring out how to tell that story simply is really important.
It's like the importance of the elevator pitch, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
We're all entrepreneurs on this call, and hopefully many listeners. So, you really start to appreciate the very core values of communicating your brand, what it stands for, and doing it succinctly, and so that people can really get it quickly.
Yeah, 100%.
What are
Amazing.
some of the lessons you've learned as an entrepreneur?
Oh my God, I've learned so many. I'm still learning so many every day. I guess there's a couple of things. It's good to see what's happening in the world, but when it comes to what you're actually doing for your brand, like being heads down and having those blinders, it's really important to like stay true to the brand and the message. It's so noisy, but really sort of staying grounded in sort of the core of the brand is so important. And then I think the other thing, and this is, I don't come from a beauty background. I'm very new in this space. And so there's a lot of imposter syndrome when it's like, do I know what I'm doing and all of that? But I think there's nothing more important than trusting yourself and your intuition when it comes to these things. You don't have to be an expert in everything. I think a lot of us are all just, the secret of life is that no one knows what they're doing and that we're all just figuring it out. So really trusting your instincts and betting on yourself is always kind of core to keeping it all going.
It's great advice. I know, listen, we're all going through our entrepreneurial journeys, and for those of you who have been entrepreneurs, you have to not only conceive the brand, think about how to market and sell it, staffing issues and everything else, but at the end of the day, it all falls down on your shoulders, because that's what we do as entrepreneurs, just to keep the business moving.
100%. Yeah, you have to have a roll up your sleeve mentality. And also I think it's important to know that you will not know how to do everything. And it's important to bring people who are smarter than you into your organizations and to partner with, check your ego in that way. It's really important. And if someone claimed to know everything, I think it means that they probably don't know much at all. So
one of the most important entrepreneurial lessons right there that you just mentioned.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what advice would you give your startup self that you wish you knew when you were launching the brand?
Oh gosh, that's really good. Patience, I would say, would be one of those things, is to be patient. I think there's this thing of always wanting more, better, faster, that sits there. But I think being patient is a really important part of, trusting yourself and aligning yourself with good people and that you can trust is a really important part of all of this. Yeah,
Could you
absolutely.
tell us what's next for Doré? Where do you see yourself, like in a year, 5 years?
My gosh, we're on the precipice of some really exciting innovation within the brand. So a lot to come, I would say, in the next 6 months for us. A little too early to start talking about it, but I think, you'll just continue to hopefully see the brand carve out more of a differentiated position within the market with some innovation that we're working on, which is really exciting. And I think bringing this idea of French pharmacy, especially to the US in a much bigger way, is really exciting for us. There's a lot happening right now. So you'll see, more product, but really focused on performance, really trying to keep the highest quality accessible at the best price point is really important to us. And then just continuing to drive home that message of simplicity and efficacy in terms of how we're building the brand will be something that we continue to dig into.
Well, I will say that you also have been very consistent in what your messaging is: simplicity, efficacy. By the way, really important, right? When the entrepreneur and the leader of the brand can't stay on message, which you obviously can and understand the value of it, this would be a formula for success. We'll say it that way. The entrepreneur needs to understand what they're trying to accomplish, what their core values are, communicated clearly. And, we've talked today about different avenues in which you may communicate that, data points you might pick up from meeting your customers and so forth. But at the end of the day, you have clearly demonstrated that you know your brand, you know your audience, and, now it's a matter of tactically finding the ways to grow it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your journey on the evolving world of beauty commerce and digital engagement. For those of you listening, if you want to experience the magic of Doré for yourself, visit their website at wearedore.com. That's wearedore.com, and follow them on social media. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the Makers of Tomorrow for further deep dives into breaking through the clutter in today's digital and social world. Until next time, keep innovating and keep advancing.